You don't arrive at this question lightly. Men don't wake up one day and decide to think this way. It forms slowly, through repetition, through experiences that feel too consistent to dismiss as coincidence, through dates that follow the same script even when... Welcome to today's new topic. Let's start listening and thinking about whether it's correct. The faces change, through conversations where your effort is assumed rather than appreciated, through a growing sense that something fundamental has shifted and no one seems willing to name it honestly. At first, most men internalize it. They assume they're unlucky, that they keep choosing wrong, that maybe they need to communicate better, earn more, be more patient, more emotionally available, more understanding. So, they adjust, they give more, they tolerate more, and instead of the situation improving, the imbalance intensifies. What felt like generosity starts to feel like obligation. What felt like attraction starts to feel like extraction. Eventually, a man notices a pattern, not in one woman, but across many. The same expectations, the same entitlement dressed up as standards, the same lack of reciprocity justified as empowerment. And when patterns repeat across individuals, the honest thinker stops blaming individuals and starts examining the environment that produces them. That's where most public conversations shut down. Because the moment you question the environment, you're accused of hostility rather than analysis. So instead, the discussion stays shallow. It stays moralized. It stays trapped at the level of individual behavior. And as long as it stays there, nothing makes sense. Because what you're seeing in modern dating is not primarily a personality problem. It's not that women suddenly became worse people. It's that the incentives shaping behavior have changed. And human behavior always follows incentives far more reliably than it follows ideals. Modern dating operates inside an economic and cultural system that rewards self-centeredness, performative independence, and constant dissatisfaction. It penalizes humility, cooperation, and long-term thinking. And when you place human beings inside that system long enough, the traits that thrive are the ones that look rude and greedy from the outside, even when the people displaying them don't consciously experience themselves that way. Start with something simple and uncomfortable. Dating today is not structured around mutual discovery. It's structured around consumption. Profiles are marketed. Attention is monetized. Time is treated as leverage. The language of connection has been replaced with the language of value extraction. Who invests more? Who chases? Who pays? Who proves themselves worthy of continued access? In that environment, courtesy is inefficient. Gratitude weakens negotiating power. Restraint reduces visibility. And greed, when framed as self-respect, becomes socially defensible. A woman who demands more than she gives is not corrected by the culture, she is validated by it. She is told she knows her worth. She is told not to settle. She is told that any discomfort she causes is the fault of men who failed to meet her standards. None of this happens in isolation. From a young age, women are immersed in narratives that equate desirability with entitlement and attention with value. Social platforms amplify this relentlessly. The more provocative the behavior, the more attention it receives. The more attention it receives, the more it is framed as success. Over time, the lesson becomes internalized, not as greed, but as normal self-optimization. At the same time, men are conditioned in the opposite direction. They are taught that their value lies in provision, patience, and emotional labor, that being rejected is a signal to improve, not to question the terms of engagement, that discomfort is part of the process, that if something feels unfair, it's because they... What's important to understand is that none of this requires malicious intent. Most people inside a system adapt without consciously endorsing it. A woman doesn't have to wake up wanting to exploit men in order to behave in ways that feel exploitative. She simply has to respond rationally to the rewards placed in front of her. If demanding more attention yields more attention, the demand increases. If minimal effort still produces dates, gifts, validation, and emotional investment, there is no corrective feedback. Over time, the behavior solidifies. What began as opportunistic becomes habitual. What began as confidence becomes entitlement. And because the culture applauds the outcome, there is no internal pressure to reflect.
From the male side, the psychological cost accumulates quietly.
Repeated exposure to one-sided dynamics erodes trust. It creates hypervigilance. Men begin to assume bad faith even when none exists. They start withholding generosity not out of bitterness but self-defense. And this in turn reinforces the very stereotypes that justified the entitlement in the first place. This is how systems sustain themselves. Each side adapts to protect itself from the distortions of the other, and the cycle deepens. So when men ask why modern dating feels full of rudeness and greed, what they're really noticing is the surface expression of a deeper misalignment, a culture that teaches people to maximize their individual advantage while still expecting intimacy to function as if mutual sacrifice were intact. Those two goals are incompatible. You cannot build trust in an environment that rewards self-interest above all else. And until that contradiction is acknowledged honestly, the experiences you're having will continue to feel confusing, personal, and demoralizing, even though they are systemic and predictable. What intensifies all of this is the way modern dating removes consequences while amplifying leverage. In earlier social environments, reputation mattered. Communities were smaller. Behavior followed people. If someone consistently acted selfishly, dismissively, or opportunistically, that reputation traveled with them. Social cost existed. Today, dating is largely anonymous and infinite. When friction appears, you don't repair it, you replace the person. The next option is always one swipe away. This fundamentally alters how people treat one another. When connection is scarce, people behave carefully. When connection feels endless, people behave carelessly. Courtesy becomes optional. Accountability feels unnecessary. Empathy declines because there is no incentive to maintain it. The system doesn't reward depth, it rewards novelty and volume. Dating apps are not neutral tools in this, they are engineered environments. Their success depends on keeping users engaged, not on helping them form stable bonds that would cause them to leave. This means they subtly encourage behaviors that destabilize connection. Endless choice creates the illusion that something better is always available. Small imperfections become deal breakers. Minor discomfort becomes justification to disengage, and people start relating to one another less as humans and more as profiles competing for attention. Within this environment, women generally hold more leverage early on, not because they are morally superior or more deserving, but because attention flows toward them more easily. Attention in this system is power, and power shapes behavior. When someone receives constant validation regardless of effort, their standards rise without their contribution rising to match them. When someone is rarely validated, they overinvest to compensate. Men feel this acutely because they are usually positioned as the providers in this equation. Even in an era that claims to reject traditional roles, many of those expectations remain firmly in place, just without the reciprocal responsibilities that once accompanied them. Men are still expected to pay, to lead, to plan, to absorb emotional volatility, to remain steady under pressure. What has changed is that these contributions are no longer reliably matched by loyalty, respect, or long-term commitment. This creates cognitive dissonance. Men are told that gender roles are outdated, but are punished socially when they fail to perform them. They are told vulnerability is attractive, but are often met with withdrawal or loss of attraction when they express it honestly. They are told to communicate, but are blamed when communication reveals incompatibility. No matter which direction they move, there is a cost. Over time, many men stop engaging sincerely. They either withdraw emotionally or adopt transactional strategies of their own. They mirror the detachment they experience. They stop giving freely. They become guarded, skeptical, strategic, and then the culture points to these men as evidence that men are emotionally unavailable, conveniently ignoring the conditions that produce them. What rarely gets acknowledged is how exhausting it is to exist in a constant audition, to feel like your worth is always provisional, that affection must be continually earned through performance rather than sustained through mutual investment. When men describe modern dating as draining, they are describing the psychological toll of never being allowed to relax into being valued for who they are rather than what they provide. At this point, some men conclude that women are the problem. Some women conclude that men are the problem. Both conclusions miss the deeper truth. The system thrives on that blame. Conflict keeps engagement high. Polarization keeps people consuming content, joining sides, reinforcing their identity through opposition. Resolution would reduce traffic. Understanding would reduce outrage, and outrage is profitable. This is why cultural narratives are framed the way they are. Women are encouraged to see caution as wisdom and suspicion as self-respect. Men are encouraged to see endurance as strength and silence as maturity. Neither side is encouraged to question whether the structure itself is producing unhealthy outcomes, because questioning the structure threatens the revenue streams built on dysfunction. And so the behaviors continue. The entitlement hardens, the resentment deepens, the loneliness spreads. Everyone feels misunderstood, everyone feels justified, very few feel connected. The danger in this environment is not just failed relationships, it is the erosion of trust itself. When enough people have enough negative experiences, they stop approaching connection with openness. They approach it with armor. And intimacy cannot form in armor. It requires risk. It requires vulnerability. It requires a belief that the other person is not an adversary. Yet the system trains people to behave as if they are. This is the paradox at the heart of modern dating. The very traits that make intimacy possible are punished by the environment meant to facilitate it. And the traits that sabotage intimacy are rewarded as empowerment, confidence, and self-worth. Until that paradox is confronted honestly, the experiences you're having will not feel like anomalies, they will feel like the norm. One of the least discussed aspects of modern dating is how emotionally exposed men become without realizing it. Men are often told that they are emotionally closed, yet in romantic contexts they tend to attach deeply and quickly. When a man commits emotionally, he does so with intensity. He doesn't drift into attachment casually. He invests identity, future orientation, and self-concept into the bond. This makes romantic loss feel less like disappointment and more like disintegration. What makes this especially dangerous in modern dating is that men are rarely taught how to regulate attachment. They are taught to suppress emotion, not understand it. So when attraction hits, it bypasses conscious control. Judgment becomes compromised. Red flags are reframed. Women operating within this system often sense this vulnerability, not consciously as manipulation, but intuitively as leverage. Human beings project behavior based on what is tolerated. When boundaries are flexible, pressure increases. When standards are inconsistent, expectations rise. Over time, the man's willingness to accommodate becomes the baseline rather than the exception. This is how entitlement is reinforced, not because someone decides to become entitled, but because no resistance is encountered. In functional relationships, boundaries create mutual respect. In dysfunctional ones, their absence creates exploitation. Again, this does not require malice, it requires only asymmetry and repetition. Compounding this is the cultural messaging men receive about leaving. Walking away is framed as failure. Ending a relationship is framed as emotional weakness or inability to commit. Men are told to fight for love, to prove devotion, to endure hardship. Meanwhile, women are told to leave at the first sign of dissatisfaction. The result is predictable. One side stays too long, the other side feels no urgency to self-correct. Over time, this creates a silent psychological trap. The more a man invests, the harder it becomes to leave. The sunk cost fallacy sets in. He remembers how things were at the beginning. He believes that if he just does a little more, gives a little more, becomes a little better, the relationship will return to that earlier state. What he fails to recognize is that the dynamic itself has changed. The initial version of the relationship no longer exists. This is why modern dating produces so many men who feel used but cannot articulate how it happened. There is rarely a single moment of betrayal. Instead, there is a gradual normalization of imbalance, a slow shift from mutual effort to unilateral provision. And because the shift is incremental, it bypasses conscious resistance. The psychological toll of this process is significant.
Men begin to doubt their instincts. They question whether their discomfort is justified or selfish. They suppress resentment rather than address it. Over time, that resentment leaks out in other ways: emotional withdrawal, passive aggression, sudden detachment. These reactions are then used as evidence that men are emotionally immature, conveniently ignoring the prolonged context that produced them. What's rarely acknowledged is that modern dating requires men to have a level of emotional literacy that they were never taught. They are expected to understand boundaries, attachment styles, power dynamics, and emotional labor, while being actively discouraged from developing emotional awareness in any other area of life. This contradiction leaves many men unprepared and exposed. Meanwhile, women are often encouraged to interpret male boundaries as insecurity. A man who says no is framed as threatened. A man who questions expectations is framed as controlling. A man who withdraws support is framed as punishing. In this framework, any attempt by a man to rebalance the relationship becomes morally suspect. The imbalance protects itself. This is where greed takes on a psychological dimension. It is not just about money or resources. It is about access. Access to time, energy, attention, emotional labor. When someone is accustomed to receiving these without cost, they begin to expect them.
When access is withdrawn, it feels like deprivation rather than recalibration. The man sensing this often retreats into silence rather than confrontation. Silence feels safer. It avoids conflict. It avoids accusations. But silence also prevents resolution. The imbalance remains unchallenged, and the relationship continues to deteriorate under the surface. Eventually, what makes this especially difficult to resolve is that the system benefits from delay. The longer people remain confused, frustrated, and searching, the more they consume. Dating apps profit from churn. Content creators profit from anxiety. Therapeutic industries profit from aftermath. Stability would reduce demand across multiple sectors. This does not require coordination. Incentives align naturally. This is why meaningful reform never gains traction. Discussions about family court imbalance stall. Conversations about shared responsibility are reframed as regression. Proposals for cultural standards are dismissed as oppressive. Anything that might reduce friction threatens the ecosystem built on it. And so individuals are left to navigate chaos alone, without shared norms, without reliable scripts, without institutional support. Each relationship becomes an experiment conducted under emotional pressure with little margin for error. The tragedy is that most people want the same thing: security, respect, partnership. But they are taught strategies that undermine those goals, while being told those strategies are empowering. The dissonance creates confusion. The confusion creates resentment. The resentment fuels the narratives that keep the system intact. Understanding this does not require adopting a cynical worldview. It requires realism, recognizing that cultural narratives are not neutral. They shape behavior by rewarding some traits and punishing others. When a culture consistently rewards entitlement and punishes restraint, the outcomes are predictable. This is why labeling the problem as moral failure misses the point. The issue is structural. When incentives change, behavior follows. And when behavior changes at scale, culture redefines normal. The question then becomes how to live well inside a system that does not prioritize your well-being, how to form healthy bonds in an environment that actively discourages them, how to maintain standards without becoming rigid, how to remain open without becoming naive. These are not questions the culture will answer for you. They must be answered individually, consciously.